It was interesting too, because we did a lot of work at night, sort of a day and night thing. And the night work was interesting because we'd have to work around Phantasmic. And so you'd be working away, and then all of a sudden there'd be this mad rush of people running around the island and things happening, things blowing up. And it was a lot of fun.
That is Imagineer Ray Spencer, who's back to talk about a bunch more projects he worked on, including the Hatbox Ghost at the Haunted Mansion, Tom Sawyer Island and the Pirate's Lair, Trader Sam's, the Matterhorn, so much cool stuff. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 169 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. Hope you're doing great out there. It is awesome to be back with another Imagineer interview. We took our detour to Walt Disney World, spent some time at the Swan and enjoying the attractions and everything else there. But now we're back digging into more stories with former Walt Disney Imagineers. Ray Spencer is back. He was here on episode 154 back in late November of last year. We talked about his work on Buena Vista Street, including the red car trolley and the storyteller statue. Lots of DCA content. Also his updates to Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland, Soarin' California, Turtle Talk, so many other attractions. And that was really just the starting point to talk more about some big projects from his career. This time we're going to talk about Hatbox Ghost at the Haunted Mansion, more on the Carthay Circle Restaurant on Buena Vista Street, Tom Sawyer Island and the Pirate's Lair. We're going to talk about the Matterhorn, Disneyland Hotel and Trader Sam's, and also a cool little gem called Seasons of the Vine that I never got to experience in person. But I've kind of fallen a bit down an internet rabbit hole watching YouTube videos, reading about it. And I'm like, man, I know it's just a short film, but it would totally have been up my alley. It reminds me a lot of the Land Pavilion in the best way possible. So it's great to get a chance to talk to Ray about that and just some overall thoughts about his career at Imagineering and beyond, including his work on the Saturn V rocket show at Cape Canaveral. And I always love stories about Cape Canaveral as a huge fan of the Apollo program. Lots to cover in this episode. I am thrilled that Ray came back and was willing to dig even further into his career. I think you're going to enjoy this one, so let's get right to it. Here is Ray Spencer.
Dan, it's a pleasure. Happy to be here. And I enjoyed our previous discussion. I'm looking forward to today's discussion as well.
Yeah, there's still more things to talk about. And I still feel like no matter how much we talk about, there's probably other things. But it's a good list today, so I'm excited.
Excellent.
All right. Well, we talked a lot last time about Buena Vista Street and dug in. But I noticed as I was listening back that we didn't talk that much about the Carthay Circle Restaurant, which I'm interested too, just on the choice of that, like as the centerpiece, because, it totally changed the vibe of the entire entrance. So I'm curious when, you and the team were going about choosing that as you could say weenie or centerpiece or something. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, the restaurant is a different entity than the shell of the theater. And the shell of the theater, from a story point of view, made sense because that theater is where Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered in 1937. And really, as I probably mentioned before, the success of that film funded the building of the Walt Disney Studios in Burbank and the success of the company. So from a questionable beginning, making that film and the risks involved in doing that, great things came. That was the reason for that building in our street and as a kind of a weenie at the end of Buena Vista Street, much like the castle is to Main Street. The restaurant as we were developing the interior programming for that space, and programming is a term, it's like, what do you put inside this thing? And then they call it programming. It's what goes in there. We went through a variety of concepts, from walkthrough exhibit about Walt's life and cafe and merchandise and maybe some kind of a little dark ride, perhaps. I mean, there was a bunch of ideas thrown up in the air. And really, to be quite candid, it boiled down to economics, because we had a fixed amount of money to do all of the work in developing, I guess they would call it DCA 2, which is Cars Land and Buena Vista Street, and reinventing, the front of the park and really kind of making it a Disney park when it really wasn't perceived as that so literally when it first opened, California Adventure. We had economics. We had a lot of things to do, and we had a fixed amount of money to do it. And it came down to what can we do in that building, in that shell? Because what you don't want on opening day is people to walk down to the end of the street and there's a padlock on the door, the Carthay Circle Theater, that says, closed, sorry, come back in 3 years when we put something in here. You don't want an empty building or a locked door. That's not a great payoff.
Not good.
No, it's not good. So the idea of a restaurant was floated, and the chairman of Parks and Resorts for Disney at the time, Tom Staggs, is a foodie. He really enjoys fine dining and the whole sort of food thing. And so we appealed to him with the restaurant concept, and we were able to get the funding to do it. And that's where that came from. And then the stories within the restaurant are, if you think about it, Academy Awards or Oscars, we considered the spaces on the first floor, this is a bar and some light foods and things like that, lobby, sort of the pre-show. But if you go up to the second floor where the Carthay Circle Restaurant proper is, we kind of looked at that as a sort of an Academy Awards, sort of a post Academy Awards party in a way, where we celebrated all of Disney's Academy Awards and through photographs and memorabilia. And so we thought about it in that way as kind of a 1-act or 2-act. Down below, you've got the sort of the pre-show with some interesting Disney memorabilia, and then up into the celebration of the Carthay Circle Restaurant proper. So once we had those ideas, then we had to figure out how to fit them into the building, because the building was already designed. It wasn't like, okay, we're building a restaurant, let's build a building that will fit that restaurant. We had a building, and then we had to figure out how to fit a restaurant into that building with existing floor plates and dimensions and all the kind of stuff that create a box. And so how do you create an environment that's compelling and interesting and intentional, purposeful, and relaxing and special? So that's kind of the genesis of how that restaurant came about.
Well, it's interesting too. Like last time we talked about the storyteller statue and the red car trolley and some of the history behind that. And then you also have, like you mentioned, the Carthay Circle having such an important history, all before Disneyland. I mean, all in that kind of early time frame. So yeah. How important was it to have that icon all kind of, and that whole land kind of fit with something that stands apart from Disneyland, but also tells its own story of Walt Disney?
Once we decided that Buena Vista Street was going to continue the Walt Disney and Roy Disney and the Disney legacy from the time Walt came out from Kansas City to California in 1923 to the premiere of Snow White in 1937. That was kind of the years that we were looking at for Buena Vista Street, because obviously Disneyland wasn't around or conceived of during those years, but the foundation and the bricks for Disneyland were being laid during those years. And that was, with some of the pioneering things that I mentioned. I mean, like I said in our first meeting, he showed up with a cardboard suitcase and $40 in his pocket from Kansas City on the California Limited, and had a big dream of being a director and working in films and animation. The first color cartoon, the first sound cartoon, multi-plane camera, all of this pioneering stuff that they were doing, the Disney studio was doing during that time period, culminated with the first feature-length animated film, which was by some considered Disney's folly, thinking it would be a big flop, and everything was riding on that film. And so the Carthay Circle Theater, where it premiered, seemed like the perfect point to culminate that story. And also, it's really iconic. I mean, it's a very iconic thing. We're not going to put another castle at the end of the street. So what is it going to be? Is it going to be City Hall? Is it going to be, if you're telling a story of early Southern California, what's it going to be? And that theater seemed like the perfect icon for that street and that story. So we really lucked out. I mean, if it was a 1-story theater that looked like a shoebox, we would have been making some different choices probably, but we really lucked out in this.
You're not going to have your local like mall AMC theater or something there. It wouldn't really have the same cachet. I think it works great because it's just it's very elegant and fits with the time, feels right for the time period. I mean, just from the few clips I've seen of Walt Disney at that time and the premiere and everything, it's really cool to see. Yeah,
it was pretty cool. So and it was fortunate too that the red cars went right by there, and I actually had a doctor way back when we were designing all of that. And he told me, he said, oh yeah. He said, I would take my wife, who was his actually fiance or girlfriend at the time. We'd take the red car, we'd go up to the Carthay Circle Theater and we'd see this film or that film. And it, I thought, okay, well that's consistent with our story, why not?
Yeah, it works great. Well, you mentioned a foodie. There's another attraction you worked on that I never experienced because it was in the DCA 1.0 timeframe.
Yeah.
But the Seasons of the Vine show in kind of the wine cellar, which then became the Blue Sky Wine Cellar, but at the time was, which I thought had a nice setup there for this film narrated by Jeremy Irons. And I'm curious to learn a little bit about that because, I watched it on YouTube and I know it comes out for various festivals, but didn't see it in that initial area.
That was a sleeper. And I think that in my opinion, because, the park really wasn't well attended when it opened. I mean, it opened, 9/11 was shortly after opening, and the park had its issues, generating crowds and popularity. But that little show was a sleeper. It was a 50-seat theater, and that winery and that theater were sponsored by Robert Mondavi. The idea originally was to have a bunch of different wineries participating so you could have the ultimate kind of wine tasting experience from a variety of California wineries. But Mondavi at the time wanted to sponsor the whole thing. And so that's what they did. It was through they call it corporate alliances. They get somebody to host the attraction. You see those signs hosted by, so-and-so or
right.
Hosted by a certain company. But Seasons of the Vine, we wanted to kind of tell the story of the seasons of winemaking. And the vehicle was a barrel room, so the walls had wine barrels and it had a kind of a rough stone texture. And then at the stage end, there were sliding barn doors that would open onto a view of a vineyard. And the view was, of course, a film, but the perspective was such that it matched the perspective in the theater. So the illusion was, you open the doors, you see the vineyard, and then depending on the season that it actually was, you would see that season outside the door, like if it was autumn or if it was winter or if it's summer. And then the story of winemaking would be told with a beautiful score. I wish I had a soundtrack, a copy of that. It was a beautiful score. And, through our research, we spent a fair amount of time up in Napa Valley and some of the other wine regions. And we got kind of a crash course on winemaking and the nuances of that, growing wine, they call it, through Mondavi and others. And it was just a neat little show. I really enjoyed it, and I was sorry to see it go, but it just, again, it didn't have the traction at the time to warrant keeping it around, because you have to have a certain number of staff running it, and you have to have a certain number of people going through it. And it was a low throughput probably, and I'm just guessing here, I can't tell you for sure, but I think, by the time you get, X number of people in there operating the show, it could be, a little bit labor intensive for the number of people that would see it. And, it didn't ultimately make the cut. Sorry to see it go, but it was a neat show. I really enjoyed that show.
Yeah, I actually first came upon it through the music because I believe there was years ago a CD about Disney California Adventure soundtrack, and it was on there, and I was like, "What is this? This is like really, really nice." It reminded me a little bit of like an Epcot pavilion or something with the background music, and I think it's out there, but it's definitely worth hearing even apart from the film. But I didn't even realize about the seasons. That's a nice touch because you have the guy in the vineyard who's like, "Hey," and everything, and talks to the person who's doing the show at the start. It's the kind of show that I wish there was more of because it doesn't do too much, but I mean it's kind of a little gem.
Yeah, I really miss it, and I really enjoyed it. And it was fun to go on location when it was being filmed and see the people and how much pride they took in their work. And the people that crush the grapes, the people that pick the grapes, the people that prune the vines, the people that test, develop the wine and keep their eye on, when it's ripe and how to barrel it. And great people, all passionate, unsung heroes in every step. And I like shows like that have some meaning and passion behind them. And that was a neat show.
Well, excellent. Switching gears to something completely different, which is I talked to Daniel Joseph a few times, and he's the illusions expert. But I talked to him partially about the Hatbox Ghost and about putting that together. And I know you worked very closely on that team or were involved with the whole project. Yeah. So I would love to talk to you about, just starting with how that even came about with this kind of legendary figure that was only in the mansion for a short time and then ultimately was brought back for the big anniversary. Yeah,
it was something like 60, was it 63 years it was gone? Something like that. Some incredible length of time. It showed it was there for a few days or a week or
like from the beginning, like in 1969 on till 2015. So 45 plus years, just crazy.
I inherited that project. The Anaheim Resort had me, WDI had me working on 3 projects down there simultaneously. One was Hatbox Ghost, one was the Matterhorn redo and the new animatronics, and the other was changing Condor Flats and Grizzly Peak Airfield, which is part of California Adventure. So I was working on all 3 of those at once, and I don't know if it was a matter of economics of Ray's down there. Let's just get him on Hatbox Ghost as well. It was something that I love Daniel and I loved working with him, and we had a ton of fun on that. And there was a couple other people that were very passionate about bringing Hattie back, and I wasn't involved in those initial sort of enthusiastic dreams. So I can't say that I really followed that too closely, because once I got involved, the wheels were already turning. Some early sort of thoughts were developed on where he might show up and how it might play out. So I inherited a project that was already, I wouldn't say it was funded and really rolling, but the idea was there and the interest was there and the timing was there. So I got involved and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about, first of all, I didn't really realize the depth and scope of the Hatbox Ghost history and how much of a cult following the Hatbox Ghost seemed to have through images and fan sites. And I didn't realize the depth of that. I mean, I was aware of the character, and I was aware that what happened, but I didn't know that the sort of this cult following was something that was part of the Disney fandom. So for me, it was a lot of fun. Once I started really studying it, then it was really fun to get into and understand. And of course, appreciating Yale Gracie and the pioneers that worked on that originally, Rolly Crump, the people that really got involved and developed the iconography of that attraction. It was humbling and fun, and working with Daniel, who's super excited, and and a few others. Vinny Lagosio was a mechanical engineer at the time, and some of the people that got involved in that. It was fantastic, and it was fantastic. The character was built in Glendale, which was more rare in recent years than in the past. So that was a neat thing. Mark Goldberg did a lot of the machining and assembly, and it was just fun, and people were very enthusiastic about working on it. So the trick with that was, where does he go? Is it in the attic? Is there a place there? And there wasn't really. So as you may be aware, once you exit the attic and you're on this little veranda area, he's right outside the attic scene, and behind him and you're overlooking the graveyard. So he's sort of off to one side of the ride vehicle. What we had to do is we had to modify the Doom Buggy track so that, they turn and they're controlled by a rail that controls an arm that moves the Doom Buggies to the right or to the left and spins them around one way or the other. We had to change the railing and the timing so that the Doom Buggies would face the character and stay facing the character until a certain point. Then it would turn and you'd go down the ramp into the graveyard. So a lot of that was technology. And then the other thing was, the exterior of the Haunted Mansion is one architectural style, but when you exit the attic, it's a different architectural style. You have different roof lines. You don't have the same architecture as the exterior in the front. So I don't know why that was, but how do you make any sense of that and have it work? It was a challenge from that point of view too, because you don't want to give up too much. You don't want people to be aware of that and really study that. So, part of our goal is to make what you don't want people to pay attention to recede, and make the stuff you do want people to pay attention to come forward. And then we did that. And then also, this is such a special character, but you don't want to light it and make it so special that it's different. It's completely different from the rest of the attraction. So part of the goal too was to not make it so special and iconic that even though it is, you don't want to make it so different that it feels like it doesn't belong in that attraction, so we had to look at that too. And also hide it when we were installing it, because the ride was down for a while. That allowed us to do a lot of the infrastructure work, but the ride was up when we were when we were kind of putting the finishing touches and installing it, and it was there. We had to hide it. We had to hide what we were doing. We did that. I don't know how successfully, but I think we did. It might have raised some questions in people's minds. Why is that wall there? Why is that thing there? But, it wasn't obvious, I don't think, that we were doing Hattie.
How challenging was that to keep the whole thing a secret? Because, I'm sure there was lots of speculation on the internet. Like you said, people are so into the mansion. I feel like so much more even now. Every year it gets to be bigger. Yeah. But just how do you find a way to do that without somebody slipping, whether it's a family member or a friend or something? Nobody really knew.
It was tough. And we had a two-dimensional cutout that was freestanding that represented where the face was, where the hat box was, and the key spots that you would want to look at it. And it was to scale, but it was themed completely different. I think we called it Jose Skellington, because it was a zarape and a guy holding something, and it had a duck's head on it. I mean, it was the craziest thing. It was this assembly of pieces and parts that absolutely, if you looked at it, the last thing you'd think of was Hatbox Ghost. But it gave us our points that we need to focus on. And so we were able to kind of get that in place and bring it up and set it up when we needed to and take it away. And I don't think anybody was thinking, oh yeah, that's Hatbox Ghost. There's no way you'd think that looking at it. So we had to come up with a very interesting disguise for that piece that let us stage the scene. And then the rest of it was done under tight security at WDI when it was being built. So we had a blacked out space in a seldom used warehouse, and we tried to keep it quiet as we could. that, we just did the best we could with what we had.
You mentioned the technology, because to me that would seem like the big challenge. I mean, the attraction is, like I said, at the time was, 45 years old. And I mean, how tricky was it? You're going into this classic attraction that most people love. It's so, so much history. And then you're putting in something new. Was it a challenge, like you already mentioned, to technologically make it all flow together? I mean, was there a lot needed to be done there?
Well, I do know that the figure itself, it had some pretty simple mechanics in it, in terms of its particular motion. And if you think about mechanical engineering, the cane or staff that he holds and the hat box and his legs, if you think about just simple articulation of mechanical pieces, the engineers did a brilliant job figuring out how to make those very simple, yet look like a lot more was going on. And then I don't pretend to understand the mechanics of the head disappearing and how that technology, I understand how it works because I've seen it work, but having it work in such a quick fashion, and combining that with lighting effects and the things that need to happen internal to that, it's very technically complicated, and all of the pieces have to work for it to work. So it's not a simple thing like the original, which was turning a light on and turning a light off. You turn the light off of a face and you turn the light on in the hat box. It wasn't nearly that simple because it's dimensional. It's dimensional. That head has to disappear, and it does. And it's pretty amazing. But it's, you think about classic card tricks and shell games, it's that too. It's like, you distract the viewer by one thing and then something else happens and they're not paying attention to it. The guy pulls the coin out from behind his ear. Well, how'd that coin get there? Well, it got there because you were looking to the left and he was doing something else and it got there, So there was a lot of that going on too.
It's like the essence of how the Omni-Movers and the theme park attractions work, where they turn you one way and you try and look the other way. And it's all, you don't want to do that because it's best to look where they want you to look.
That's the thing. I mean, if you think about it, and having some experience with film prior to my Disney days, the ride vehicle is a camera, and the camera looks where you want people to see. And if the camera turns around and looks where you don't want them to see, I mean, if a camera in a feature film turned around and you saw a bunch of people standing around in lights and directors' chairs, and that's not what you want to see. So thinking about people as cameras, it's helpful to design something, thinking that way.
Totally. Well, you also mentioned the Matterhorn, and I know that you were involved with updating that attraction with, like you said, the new animatronics and the other edits. What was it like to be able to work on another kind of classic early Disneyland attraction?
Well, again, what's interesting about Disney is that in Disney history, each piece of Disney's history and each step along the way, there's a soft spot in people for specific moments and specific things, and it's meaningful. It those moments resonate in a very personal way. So with the snowman, the animated snowman, the original they called Harold, which was more or less static. I think it kind of rocked back and forth and moved its arms and had red light bulb eyes, that kind of thing. There's a certain number of people that identified with that, and it's part of their experience growing up and experience of the Matterhorn. So a couple things were going on there is replacing the animated figures so they were more animated and a little more lifelike. That's one thing. Number two is setting up the story of meeting this character earlier in the attraction. I mean, you see some stuff outside and out in the queue, you see a footprint, you see some things, and then you hear some roaring and things like that. But, we were looking at ways to kind of plus it and create some anticipation without being obnoxious, because it's a classic attraction, like you said. And, we wanted to respect that. I think, you look at the things that maybe aren't so strong, like, for instance, going up the lift hills, there was some whole windows in the rockwork. I'll call them windows, but when you look as you're going up the lift hill and you see the snow falling out the window, and it's it's an effects projector doing effect snow, and it doesn't look like a lot of any, it doesn't look much like snow. It doesn't look, what is it? So those areas that could be plussed, we wanted to take advantage of. And so we created some fake ice walls that had some transparency, but acted as kind of a funny lens that would distort what's behind it or exaggerate what's behind it. We did a lot of testing and figured that out. And then we created some animated film clips of our snowman that would, behind this ice wall, it wouldn't be really evident that it wasn't particularly three-dimensional. It was a 3D computer-generated image. And so we were able to kind of start setting that up with a little bit of noise. And if you look at the right angle at the right time from a certain car, you might catch a glimpse of the snowman behind the ice. And so we were able to start telling that story that way. The trick with that is that you have two tracks going up the lift hill. You have what they call the A track and the B track. And the cars are moving at different times. They're dispatched at different times. And how do people get a glimpse of what's in the ice windows? There are windows on the right and on the left side of the tunnel going up the lift hill. And how does everybody get a glimpse of that with all the timing being so different? And so you have to find kind of your optimum case scenario. It's not a case where everybody's going to see that, but how do we create this so the most number of people can get a glimpse of that? And then pay it off with seeing the dimensional snowman. The trick with the dimensional snowman is that he's much bigger than the original. He's much bigger. The goal there was to get him closer to the vehicles just by a scale, because he's in the same location as the original snowmen, were located. That attraction, as you know, was I think it was built in 58? I don't know.
It opened in 59 with
so the
big opening.
Was built in 58. And so, there's a lot of history in that building, and a lot of water and a lot of things have gone through there. And so there's areas that it's really difficult to retrofit, very difficult, because the condition of the steel and the way things are built. And, there's some, kind of precarious things where you can't really reinforce too much without making a major structural change to the attraction. So we had to work with what we had. And so fitting the snowman in there and getting him in, there was severe space limitations. The reason that you don't see the snowman's entire body is the scale of the snowman is up from behind an opening and kind of leaning into the scene. That was a real challenge. And each track, both tracks, the A and the B track, see the animated snowman at the top of the hill. When you're going down the mountain, as you come close to the end of the ride, you get a glimpse of the snowman once again from both A and B tracks, and those are separate figures. So they're not the same one that both tracks sees. But the illusion is that once you're on it, you don't know if there's another one around there. I mean, it was a challenge. It was a real challenge.
Oh, I can imagine, just given the timing, of that being such an early attraction of that type. Really the first one like that at all. It's
well, and the other thing too is with the snowman, the issues they've had with the Yeti at Expedition Everest, and the engineering of something that, is going to shake and cause some real issues with it structurally. And, we didn't want that with this one. So all of the arms and the joints are all pinned so that you don't have any crazy weight that's going to tear the thing apart over time. It's all pinned together so that the motion isn't self-destructive. And we had to work hard with that too. So, there's a lot of things that go into these things, that it's not just that we decided to, put an arm here and put an arm there. There are reasons that those things are done sometimes that it's not obvious, that, we have to do it for the longevity of the character, or for structural reasons, or who knows what. There's a lot of decisions that go into this stuff.
And you're always learning too, like you mentioned, because Everest, I wrote it early on, and it was like, this is incredible. But, they didn't know it was going to happen. But so you have to constantly be learning as you go when you do all these, especially updates, like you said, to something that's older.
Yeah. And the thing is, once they stop moving, we joke about putting a strobe light on it. Well, that's what happened in Anaheim with the characters at the end of the ride. You get a strobe light, they don't move anymore.
Disco Yeti, as they call it. Yeah.
But it was very satisfying to do that.
Speaking, I feel like we're just going through all the classic attractions you've updated, but I was going to move on to Tom Sawyer Island, which I talked to Chris Runco about Pirate Slayer, which I know was one of the changes you made, and just how short of a time frame it was to put the Pirate Slayer in. So I'd love to know, because I know you closely worked on that, about working on, opening, classic attraction that people love, updating it, and doing it in a very short time.
Well, I had 2 stints on Tom Sawyer Island. One was after Fort Wilderness was torn down. When it was being dismantled, I went to some of the powers that be and I said, look, we'll take this stuff out, but if we're not going to add or augment or give something back, that seems kind of dissatisfying to our guests. I did a little concept for some play stuff and some interactive stuff on the island, and specifically on the rocks and things like that. And so we did that over one summer just to make it a little more fun and engaging for kids and our guests. The fun part about that was they decided that all of the the rocks that lead into the caves and the things the kids scramble up and some of the things, all of those, they wanted them to be sort of more compliant with traditional stairs and things like that. Stairs have a certain amount of rise, the vertical part to the tread, which is the horizontal part. And, it's hard to make rocks that look like stairs. I mean, it's hard for stairs to look like rocks. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? And it's like nature doesn't create rocks that look like a staircase. They just don't. It doesn't happen that way. So, the guys would pour concrete in the morning, and then in the afternoon, they jackhammer it all out to start over again. So this went on for, quite a while. And, we had some successes and, some not so successful, but we had a lot of interesting times trying to do some of those things that would update from a technical point of view, the rocks. The Pirate's Lair was, that was in response to the premiere of Pirates of the Caribbean. I think it's either 2 or 3. I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been 3, but that was held at the park. And in advance of that, our chairman of Parks and Resorts at the time, Jay Rizzullo, came to us at Imagineering and said, okay, we want to put more pirates here. Here's X million dollars and you have 6 months to do it. You mentioned Chris Runco. I worked with him and Chris Merritt. So we just got to work. And the interesting thing was, we saw some of the original structure on the island. There's a couple of rock structures, play structures. I think it was called Castle Rock. I'm not confusing that with Castle Peak, but I think it was called Castle Rock. But it was the stuff that was done when Walt was involved originally. And it was the first time any of that had been cut open since the park was built originally. And the interesting thing was, as we cut into some of that rock work, the stuff that would require a team of structural engineers today was nowhere evident. You'd have 2x6 boards laying on the ground and all this crazy stuff. And the interesting thing was, none of it was really damaged by time or insects or anything. It was shocking to me because, I worked on Big Thunder Mountain in Anaheim, where we had to completely rebuild the town of Rainbow Ridge. And all of those buildings had to be replaced because they were all termite ridden and completely gutted by nature. And so, just from one little part of the park to the other, I didn't see any of that damage. And so we went in there and we went into what was called Injun Joe's Cave, which was a cavern that goes through the island. We added some interactive elements in there that were pirate themed. We added, and Chris Runco was, of course, involved in the interactives heavily, and he did a great job. We did a lot of work with concrete and creating pieces of pirate shipwrecks and, tying that into a history that would make sense with Tom Sawyer Island was the challenge. It's like, okay, Tom Sawyer Island pirates, what do these have to do with one another? I mean, how do you resolve,
Yeah.
How do you resolve that and have it make any sense? So, we did some research and we found that kind of obliquely there was some pirate activity down around New Orleans and up the Mississippi River there. There was you could find some sort of oblique connection. And so, I don't know if we really completed that circle, but we did the best we could. And that was kind of that. It's tough too, because like you said, I mean, it's a classic. Again, it's an original classic. And how much do you mess with it? And how much does it enhance the guest experience versus compromise somebody's memory and somebody's, warm, fuzzy feelings about it.
I think you did a good job. And also, I think, too, I mean, yes, it's changed, but it would be different if they just blew up Tom Sawyer Island and started over and built a giant building and Jack Sparrow it was something kind of gaudy, where this is like, it's a way, I think, to preserve it, because the alternative would be losing it. And that,
right.
We've seen that happen with other attractions. In most cases, I think people would rather have something that might be different, but still kind of feels similar.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because we did a lot of work at night, sort of a day and night thing. And the night work was interesting because we'd have to work around Phantasmic. And so you'd be working away, and then all of a sudden there'd be this mad rush of people running around the island and things happening and things blowing up. And it was a lot of fun.
Never a dull moment. Well, I want to ask you about one more Disney attraction, which is, I've talked to Brandon Clyley about this, about Trader Sam's and Tiki Bar, which such a fun place at the Disneyland Hotel. And I still sometimes can't believe it's only been open for a little more than 10 years, because it feels like it's been there forever.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear a little bit about that, about your work there and just kind of what it was like to get to be involved with such a cool place.
They were remodeling the Disneyland Hotel when I got involved in that project. So the towers had gone from sort of a 80s, the 90s, had a little bit of Victorian and oak and wallpaper and, very dated kind of a thing. And so they were remodeling those. The color palettes were going toward blue, and the balconies were going away, and they were becoming much more sleek. So when I got involved, it was like, okay, well, this is going on. So we're going to rename the towers. And what is the theme of this place now? What is it? What do we do? What do we do? And I was specifically involved in the courtyard, the spaces between the towers, because the tower architecture, it had pretty much already been established the way it was going. The final color selections and things like that weren't done at the time. But what does that courtyard become? With that kind of mid-century tiki escapism thing, there was a nucleus in the architecture that was already there, at least with the convention areas and the public areas, besides the towers. But the nucleus was kind of there. It kind of made sense to sort of go back and infer in a modern way the roots of Disneyland and looking at it sort of from original things. So, and I worked on we had several creative executives working on that over the time period that I worked on it. So I did the concept for the monorail pool tower that's sort of in the center of the pools there. It's got the old Disneyland sign on top, and then the monorails are on the slides themselves. I think Tom Fitzgerald was involved in that at the time, and I think he may have come up with the idea of the monorails. I don't really recall, but anyways, that concept was done. And then we had another creative executive that came along and hated that idea. When you go from creative portfolio executive to creative portfolio executive, it's very subjective. One guy's going to like something, one guy's going to hate something. And what I learned in my experience over the years is that don't take anything personally. If I can help, even if it's a binary decision, stick a drawing on the wall, I hate that, and then it goes in the trash, at least it helps get closer to the next, whatever the evolution is and the solution. So I was very good at that in my earlier, involvement, because I spent a lot of time doing quick sketches, and that helps people focus and make decisions. So with Trader Sam's, Hooks Point was the restaurant where Trader Sam's is located now. Originally, when I came on board, it was called Hooks Point. It had sort of had a pirate ship and a skull, and the pools were more Peter Pan themed. The restaurant needed to be rebuilt. And for various reasons, using the existing footprint or foundation was economically and strategically the best decision at the time, according to project management. We had a footprint we had to work up with. And then what's this thing going to become, and how does it support this kind of carefree sort of 50s tiki vacation, throw your cares away lifestyle? And again, it was Tom Fitzgerald who had the idea for a tiki bar. For me, it was just being consistent as the creative executive for that project, getting the right people together who would execute and do it in a way that reinforced the story and made it better. Because really, on that project, I wasn't, besides doing the original sketches and working on the special effects and things like that, I was encouraging and counting on people like Brandon and Emily O'Brien, who designed the interior, to take it and make it something special. So there's a lot of people involved in this that stepped up, and Brandon did an excellent job with the storytelling and all the details and the props and things like that. He really made it that much better. And Emily did a great job with the interiors. I worked with Daniel Joseph once again on the special effects windows, and I have some actual photographs of him and I painting blacklight paint on the volcanoes. So, we spent a lot of time going back and forth with the effects vendors and trying to make that work and keeping it fun. It needed to be a fun place. And that was sometimes things get very serious when you're designing something, and especially at WDI where, you get 30 people in a room and we're talking about special effects, and you think about, you have to back up and say, okay, who's Trader Sam's and what would he do? If he wanted a lava effect, would he take a red light bulb and shine it on crinkled foil? And, that's the lava. He might do that, and it's great. But WDI has a way of saying, oh, no, we can't do a red light bulb on crinkled foil. We have to go out and make a $250,000 CGI precious thing that might be spectacularly beautiful in the cinematographic world. But if you're not thinking about who created this place and what it is, it's out of place. So for me, it was like, how do we keep the story straight and the personality straight so that the place has its fun and it's a little tongue in cheek and it doesn't take itself too seriously. And so I think it was a success from that point of view. It's really surprising and humbling how much people seem to enjoy the bar there. So and it's small. It's a tiny little place, Yeah, it's interesting, really interesting.
It's a good point about just the story because you can have the most spectacular thing, but some of like the best effects or best places or attractions or locations, that's not really what people rarely come home and say, wow, that was so cool because of X. It's because the whole experience is cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Trader Sam's works so well.
I'll tell you a story about the little marquee that's over the entrance there. It's a barrel that says Trader Sam's on it, and it's got there wasn't enough room to do a fully round barrel. So in my sketch, I squished it. So if you look at the top of the barrel, it's kind of an oval. It's an oblong. It's a very weird shape. And I thought, well, I think we can get away with it because it looks dimensional, and it's, I don't think people are going to sit there and analyze that barrel. So I did the sketches, and we worked with the graphic designers who came up with the marquee. But fortunately, later I found that there are actually squished barrels. So it is prototypical.
Totally normal.
Yeah.
Normal thing. Well, I wanted to quickly ask you just about something that wasn't at Disney, about at Cape Canaveral, which is that you worked on an Apollo Saturn V rocket show. And I'm just curious for you too. I mean, you've worked so much at Disney on so many attractions, and I know you're interested in history.
Yeah.
To work on something that connects to like real life history and something so monumental. I mean, what was that like for you?
Well, it was in my pre-Disney days, and I was working for BRC Imagination Arts at the time, and I worked for them not as a 5-day a week, 12 months a year employee, but a project by project hire. So, I did quite a few projects with them, which was a lot of fun. Great company to work for. And at the time, I think I was officially the show designer or show. I don't know. I'd have to look at the credits and see what I was doing. But at that time, it was, I was again doing concept sketching, concept art, and then trying to be pragmatic about it so you could kind of build it, or at least it had some pragmatism that you could use as a point of departure. I wasn't the greatest artist, but at least I could sort of help get there. And one thing that I did with BRC, and Bob Rogers told me this a couple times, and I listened very carefully, because, when you're doing work like that, and especially early on in a career, you have some choices to make. If you're not the greatest artist, then what can you do? You either do it faster or cheaper. And if it's either better, faster, or cheaper, and maybe a little bit of all mixed into one.
Right.
So there has to be a reason. And I know he told me once that I would be involved in these charrettes where they would bring somebody in, like Robert Ballard, or, an astronaut or somebody. They'd bring somebody in for these charrettes about some attraction that was telling a story about something very profound. And I would sit in the meetings, and he told me about somebody that would sketch in real time. I forget who it was, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to do that. I am going to do that. I am going to sit and sketch in real time while these charrettes are going on. And I would draw, and I would draw, and I would draw, and people are talking, we're all talking, I'm drawing and sticking stuff on the wall as the thing's going on. And it was, it was pre-digital, so I wasn't working on a tablet or anything. It was just, and the beauty of it was, at the end of the day, you'd have a wall of sketches. And like I said before, they may not be a solution, and half, a lot of them will, might end up in the trash, but it helped focus and get a direction. And I think that's where my contribution came in. And with the Apollo Saturn V, it was more specific than that. I mean, I got involved more with the scenes and the scenography, but again, it was kind of about staging something that told a great story. There's the firing room. That's that room with all the computers and the guys looking at the screens and all the NASA guys. And it's very exciting when the thing takes off. And then, you see the blast light through the windows, and then seeing the lunar the lunar module on the moon surface. Back then, that was a huge story. And I read a bunch of books about it, about the Apollo program and the moon landing and things like that. And those were huge stories with a lot of intrigue and drama and things that, you take for granted today. But that was pretty intense back then. If you think about the lunar module and the Apollo capsule, didn't have any more computing power than probably a very elementary cell phone. I mean, there was nothing going on, So those were different times, and people were really smart and did some pretty amazing stuff. And there's a very passionate story to be told there. And so, if I could help do that, I did. I was not there day in and day out, but I did help with the project, and I'm very proud to have done that.
Oh, definitely. The entire place is great. And I grew up after, I grew up during the shuttle program.
Yeah.
But I've read a lot about the Apollo program, and it's fascinating what they were able to accomplish given like you said, the technology and just the risk. It's incredible.
No, it is incredible. And you think about it, It wasn't that many years before that when the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik satellite. And that was, I don't know when that was, but that was 1960 or
late 50s, I think. I mean, it was like a 10-year period, basically, where everything happened.
Because I remember when I was a little kid, I was in Nebraska, and the Sputnik flew overhead. It was probably 1960 or 59. I don't know when it was. Mm-hmm. But I remember everybody outside, it was like watching an episode of Twilight Zone. Everybody's outside looking in space and seeing this little dot moving across the sky. It's like, I felt like I was in a Rod Serling thing, like To Serve Man or some, some weird, bomb shelters. And I mean, that precipitated a whole bunch of stuff, so.
That's crazy. Well, I want to ask you one kind of overall question here. I'm curious for you, just, whether it's people or attractions or anything, what were some of kind of your big inspirations or even mentors you worked with at WDI that really played a big role kind of in where your career ended up going?
I would say that it probably started before WDI. For me, I mean, there was a few artists that I really liked their work, and it really touched me. I remember when I started in sort of this entertainment world, I worked for a company out in Culver City, California, called Showscan Film Corporation. It was started by Douglas Trumbull, the special effects guy, and he passed away recently, which is shame, but he did the special effects for 2001 and Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the first Star Trek movie, and just a very interesting and pioneering guy. And when I was working out there, I ran across these flat files, which are horizontal filing cabinets that have, people keep drawings, architects kept drawings in them and stuff like that. And I opened these things up, and that was in the maybe mid 80s, late 80s. And I saw some sketches in there that were the simplest, most competent sketches that I'd ever seen. They were of all kinds of crazy, special effects things and dinosaur things and fantasy things. And the drawings were so economical. They were just kind of single line with a little bit of tone, and they told the stories so beautifully. I was very influenced by that. And it ended up that the artist was a guy named Dan Gouze. And Dan Gouze, I worked with him at Imagineering, years later, and I was very happy. I was excited to meet him. There's some people that you see their work from afar and you put them on a pedestal, and then and then you meet them. Well, he was one that I really enjoyed meeting with and working with, and there were others along the way, but I had the opportunity to work with Ralph McQuarrie. Again, this was at Showscan, and we were working on a space-themed concept, a traveling show, and he was brought in for a couple of weeks. And I'll tell you that spending 2 weeks with him and having lunch with him every day and just chatting was amazing. It was amazing because he was a very humble, quiet man. And if you've seen any of the Star Wars books or, that guy was amazing and pioneering. And you think about, I asked him once, we were having lunch and we were walking around, and I said, do you ever think about the fact that here you came up with these concepts for R2-D2, and everybody walking around on the street probably knows what those characters are. Does it ever occur to you that you did the concept for them, and all these people, millions and millions of people, are familiar with those characters? No, he said, I don't think about it. He's just a quiet guy, but so competent. He would do sketches the size of a postage stamp to do his first little thumbnail of what he's thinking. And these little postage stamp sketches were just so precious. What an inspiration. And then I had the chance to work with a guy named Sid Mead on another project. And he called himself a visual futurist, but a fabulous painter of science fiction and kind of future stuff, future cars, future world, future everything. And what a talent. Those guys were inspiration from sort of a painting, thinking point of view. And then the others are storytellers. I mean, obviously Walt Disney's story was like huge and like just amazing. And there's a bunch of them that I could list, but those guys were just huge to me.
Well, those are all great examples. And they're all so talented. They have done so much, and that you were able to work with them is awesome. And Well, Ray, I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for talking with me again.
Oh, sure.
I really appreciate it.
Time just flies, right?
Loved hearing about it. Time flies by, and it's been great. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Dan, and looking forward to doing it again someday if you're so inclined.
If you enjoyed this episode, you should definitely listen to episode 154, which was the first appearance of Ray Spencer. He fills in a lot of the gaps, especially about his background and time before Disney, including his love of trains. You can find that and a lot more at tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with an S at the end. Wanted to give a big thanks to my latest member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon, Jeff Lambert. Jeff, thanks so much for helping to support the show. It makes a huge difference. If you are interested in learning how to help this podcast and get access to some really cool perks, go to patreon.com/tomorrowsociety. Or if you just like to buy me a Dole Whip, go to tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip to learn how to leave a one-time contribution. I always love hearing from you about the show. If you'd like to get a hold of me, shoot me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, or follow me on Twitter, TomorrowSOC, Facebook or Instagram @TomorrowSociety. The music that you are hearing right now was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really appreciate it. Hope you're all doing awesome out there as you start to prepare for the summer. It's getting very warm here. I'm not sure I'm ready for it. Lots of fun shows on the way, hoping to get out to some parks over the summer and tell you all about them, plus lots of fun interviews with Imagineers and lots of other experts on theme parks. I cannot wait, and I will talk to you again next time.